Whispers at dawn. The village of Kuroda woke each morning to the sound of the river, humming softly as it slipped over stones that had stood longer than memory. Kuroda was a quiet place, wrapped in mist and mystery, where every hut was built in a circle around the sacred stones, tall, moss-covered pillars said to be as old as the sky. The people of Kuroda lived in peace, but that peace had a price. A ritual, as old as the village itself, was performed for every newborn. On the first morning after birth, just as the first light of dawn touched the treetops, the child was to be held up toward the sky. The sun would shine upon the baby's skin, and the great serpent god Ngoma, believed to watch silently from the sacred stones, would bless the child with life. No one dared to skip this ritual. No one, except Joma and Nora. Their son, Elu, was born weak, with breath that rattled in his chest like a loose drum. The healer warned them, taking him out into the chill of dawn could kill him. They listened to her advice. They stayed in the hut. They waited. But when the sun rose on the third day, Elu vanished. No sound. No struggle. No trail. The mat beside him still warm, but empty. All that remained was a single silver scale, glinting softly where the child had lain. The village was plunged into mourning. That night, under the weight of grief and smoke from the morning fires, the elders gathered by the sacred stones. The tallest among them, Elder Morley, raised a carved staff edged with snake fangs. Ngoma is not cruel, he said, his voice like dry leaves. It is just. The law was broken. The serpent does not forgive. The crowd nodded, some slowly, some quickly, all in fear. But in the back, standing in silence, Tima held her own newborn daughter, Imoya, to her chest. She felt the child's heartbeat against her own and looked up at her partner, Oji, who stared at the sacred stones with a sharp frown. "Do you believe it?" she whispered. "No," he said flatly. "I believe someone wants us to." That night, Tima couldn't sleep. Imoya dozed peacefully, unaware of the darkness pressing on her village. But the whispers outside, actual whispers, were growing louder. Not gossip. Not voices. Wind, calling around the sacred stones. River, murmuring secrets to the soil. And maybe, something else. Tima remembered something her grandmother once said, truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers at dawn. The next day, Joma and Nora didn't leave their hut. They sat side by side like ghosts. Friends came to bring food and water, but Joma just stared into the fire. Nora refused to speak. The elders came again. This time, they spoke louder. "Let this be a warning to all," said Moali. "Any child who is not given to the dawn light shall be taken by Ngoma. The serpent sees. The serpent judges." The village nodded. Again. And again, in the back, Oji stood with arms crossed. "No one sees the serpent," he muttered to Tima. "Only the elders tell us what it wants. What if they're lying?" Tima shushed him, her eyes darting toward listening ears. "Don't say that aloud," she warned. "We could be exiled." But the thought planted itself like a seed in her mind. Later that evening, as the moon hung low and lazy in the sky, Oji took Tima aside behind the fish drying racks. "I want to find out where that scale came from," he said. Tima frowned. It was a sign. Everyone saw it. "Exactly," Oji said. "Too perfect. Too placed." She looked at him carefully. "You want to search the stones, don't you?" He nodded. Tima looked down at her daughter, whose tiny hands gripped her necklace even in sleep. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we'll be crossing a line that can't be uncrossed." Oji didn't flinch. Maybe it's time someone did. And so, as the fires of morning burned down into smoke and ash, and as the village of Kuroda tried to pretend life would return to normal, two people quietly decided to ask the question no one dared to voice. What if Ngoma was not watching? Or worse. What if Ngama was never there at all? The serpent's warning. The village of Koroda awoke to blood. Not human blood, but the river's. The river Azor, once clear and gentle, now flowed dark and red under the early dawn. The elders called it a sign. Ngama is watching, said Elder Morley, once again clutching his snake-carved staff like it gave him power. The serpent knows who obeys, and who does not. The villagers murmured nervously, casting glances toward their children. Some parents held their babies a little tighter. Others looked to the sky, silently begging for mercy. But at the edge of the village, in a modest hut with a palm leaf roof, Tima and Oji stood in tense silence. "I'm telling you," Oji said, staring at the red water. "This isn't a curse. It's a warning, but not from a god." Tima didn't respond right away. She was still staring at the dead crow left outside their door that morning. Its wings were spread unnaturally, like it had been poised. The omens had begun. That same day, the second child disappeared. Her name was Mela, a bright-eyed girl only 5 days old. Her parents, Tika and Sumi, had skipped the dawn ritual not out of rebellion, but fear. After seeing what happened to Joma and Nora's baby, they couldn't bear to risk their newborn. That night, they awoke to silence. No crying. No breath. Just an empty cradle and, once again, a single silver scale. The villagers gathered at their home like ants to honey, whispering and clutching charms. Tika collapsed to his knees, while Sumi screamed so hard her voice cracked like dry wood. Why would Ngoma punish them? Someone asked. They were scared, not defiant. Maybe the serpent doesn't care about reason. Maybe the serpent isn't real. That last voice was nearly lost in the crowd. But it landed like a stone in a still pond. The next day, Tima made a choice. She wrapped Imaya tightly to her back, brought a basket of fruit as an excuse, and walked to the oldest hut in the village, the one with ivy creeping up its sides and time carved into its walls. She knocked softly. A cracked voice answered, "If you're here to confess, I'm not a priest." "I'm not here to confess," Tima said. "I'm here to ask what you remember." The door creaked open to reveal Elder Bona, the oldest living soul in Koroda. He was nearly blind, but his hearing was sharp as ever. His eyes, clouded but clever, studied her face. "You're Joru's granddaughter," he said. She had the same fire in her bones. Tima entered and sat across from him, heart pounding. The room smelled of herbs and old smoke. On the far wall hung a faded tapestry of Ngoma, its long body coiled around the stone altar. "I don't believe this ritual means what they say," she began. "It doesn't," Bona said flatly. "Wait, what?" "The naming was never about obedience," he continued. "Not in the beginning." He leaned forward, voice dropping low like the hum of a drum before a storm. Ngama was once the protector of the Shrine of Roots, deep in the jungle. It watched over the sacred spring that gave us life. The naming ritual began when the shrine was attacked, and the people begged Ngama for mercy. It was never meant to be done in fear. Only in gratitude. Tima's breath caught. "So what changed?" "The war," he said. "And the lies that followed." But Bona wouldn't say more. He gripped her wrist gently and said, "Truth is a serpent, child. You can chase it, but don't be surprised if it bites." Back home, Tima told Oji everything. He was already pacing like a storm ready to break. "So the ritual was twisted, turned into a tool for control," he growled. "All these years, we've been feeding fear, not faith." He walked to the doorway, staring out at the sacred stones. "What if we stopped it?" he asked suddenly. Tima's eyes widened. "What do you mean, stopped it?" "The next child is due in 3 days. The elders will be expecting the dawn ritual. But what if we refused? Publicly. What if we told everyone what you learned?" Tima hesitated. You know they'll call it blasphemy. Let them, Oji said. If fear is what holds this village together, then maybe it's time it fell apart. He looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully in a basket by the fire. I'd rather risk the wrath of a myth than lose her to a lie. That night, as the stars blinked quietly overhead, Tima and Oji made a plan. They would gather the bravest few they could trust. They would speak the truth out loud. And on the morning of the next naming, they would refuse. They would not hold their child up to the sky. They would not bow to the stones. They would not beg a silent God for life. They would demand the truth instead. The Forbidden Stone. The jungle that wrapped around Kuroda like an ancient secret had always been considered sacred and suspiciously off limits. The elders warned that anyone who stepped beyond the stone line without permission would bring disaster upon the village. Which, of course, is exactly why Tima and Oji crossed it before dawn. They moved quietly, their steps careful, guided by the cracked map Tima had traced from the old tapestry in Elder Bono's hut. The air was thick, alive with insects and old tension. Roots twisted like veins under their feet. How far? Oji whispered, brushing aside a branch. Not far, Tima answered. The spring is supposed to be just beyond the Hill of Echoes. How poetic, Oji muttered. Sounds cursed. They both laughed, just once, because nervous laughter is the only kind that survives in a place like this. When they reached the shrine, the jungle seemed to breathe in. It stood at the edge of a crystal-clear spring, a crumbled stone circle, choked with moss, vines, and silence. In the center was a flat slab of rock, once carved and polished, now weathered and broken. The remains of what might have once been a statue, a serpent's head with obsidian fangs, lay cracked on the ground. Tima approached the altar. This is it, she said softly. The shrine of roots. Oji stepped forward, brushing away leaves from the stones nearby. Beneath them, they saw symbols, spirals, lines, and glyphs etched deep into the stone. Look here, he called. It's a story. Tima crouched beside him, heart thudding. She read aloud the carvings, voice trembling as the words formed. When the bond is broken, the watcher will strike. When the blood of two tribes stains the roots, the protector becomes the punisher. Only when truth is spoken under the rising sun shall the curse be undone. Oji sat back on his heels. It's not about babies at all, it's about a treaty. Back in the village, panic had already exploded like wildfire in dry grass. The chief's grandson, Kojo, barely 3 days old, had been taken. His mother swore she had done everything right. Held him up at dawn. Whispered the name. Followed every step of the ritual. But Kojo vanished anyway. All that remained. A silver scale. Larger than the others. Still warm. The chief was enraged. He blamed the villagers, accused them of impurity, of broken promises. In return, the villagers whispered that maybe it was the chief's family who had angered Ngoma. Old feuds re-emerged like ghosts. Neighbors refused to speak to one another. Accusations flew faster than arrows. Fear was now king. When Tima and Oji returned, it was like stepping into a storm of suspicion and superstition. But they didn't waste time. They gathered 4 trusted villagers under the cover of night, people who had lost children, or doubted quietly in corners. Kemi, the midwife who had seen the fear in parents' eyes for years. Boza, a farmer whose daughter vanished at dawn despite completing the ritual. Emefa, an old woman whose brother was the first to go missing long ago. Antika, still grieving Melo, holding his pain like a burning coal. Tima laid out the truth. The shrine wasn't built for fear. It was built to keep a promise between 2 tribes. Something happened. That promise was broken. That's what the wrath is about. Not disobedience. Not missing a ritual. Boza stared at the ground. So we've been offering our babies to cover up a war. Kemi clenched her fist. If that's true, then the serpent is not the enemy. The lie is. They decided, then and there, to end it. No fire. No rebellion. No blood. Just truth. On the morning of the next naming ritual, the largest one of the year, they would all appear. But they would not kneel. They would not raise their children to the sky. Instead, they would speak the prophecy aloud, in front of everyone. They would call the serpent. And this time, they would not ask for its blessing. They would ask for the truth. The rise of truth. Dawn in Kuroda used to mean peace. But this morning, it tasted like storm air, heavy, electric, and tight around the lungs. The villagers gathered in the clearing of stones, their faces tight with fear and habit, some carrying children, some carrying regrets. The chief stood tall, face hard as carved granite. The elders lined the stone steps like silent judges, with Elder Morley gripping his serpent staff like it was the last thread of control he had left. At the center of it all, the naming altar, sleek with dew and tradition. The chanting began, low and haunting. Ngoma of the stones, Ngoma of the sun, keeper of life, judge of the young. And then, Tima stepped forward. She held Imoya, swaddled in a golden cloth, her little fists twitching, her eyes wide. Beside Tima stood Oji, eyes blazing. They walked straight to the altar. And then stopped. The crowd murmured. Present the child, Elder Morley backed. No, Tima said, steady as a rock in the river. We will not. Gasps rippled through the clearing like thunder through trees. You dare defy the protector? Morley hissed. We don't defy the protector, Oji replied. We defy the lie. The clouds above began to roar. Tima raised her voice. Ngama was never a god of punishment. The shrine we honor here is not the original. We found the truth. We found the shrine of roots, and the prophecy. People stirred. Whispers flew. Elder Morley slammed his staff. Silence. Blasphemy. But then, the wind stopped. The jungle grew still. And the earth gave a low, trembling groan. From the trees behind the altar, something enormous slithered into view. Ngoma had come. Its body was long enough to coil around the clearing twice. Scales dark as river stone. Eyes glowing like suns behind clouds. It moved not with speed, but with purpose. Ancient, deliberate, terrifying. The villagers dropped to their knees. Some screamed. Others fainted. Tima stood her ground. You want our children, she shouted at the beast. Then take her. She held Imoya high, but not in worship. In challenge. The serpent's gaze fixed on her. The tension was sharp enough to split the sky. But Ngama did not strike. Instead, it slithered around the altar, once, twice. Then it stopped, reared back, and with a hiss that shook the leaves from the trees, it struck the altar itself. Stone cracked like thunder. Dust flew into the air. The ground split open, revealing not gold, not relics. But bones. Small bones. Dozens of them. And among them, weapons. The villagers gasped. Elder Morley stumbled backward. The chief dropped his staff. From the crowd, Elder Bonner stepped forward, walking slowly, leaning on a crooked cane. The time for silence is over, he said softly. He turned to the villagers, his voice louder now. What you see are the bones of innocents. Long ago, during the Great Drought, our leaders made a secret deal with the people of the Yanza tribe. They offered refuge, but broke that promise. They led them into the jungle, into this sacred ground, and had them killed. Buried their bodies here, beneath a false altar. He took a shaky breath. The real shrine lies deep in the jungle. There, Ngama waits, not for obedience, but for justice. The villagers stood frozen. The ritual you followed for generations, Bonner continued, was created to cover up the truth, to make you afraid, so you'd never uncover the past. Oji's voice rang out. And now we know. The people of Kuroda were no longer kneeling. One by one, they stood. Some in shock, others in tears, but many in rage. You lied to us, someone shouted at Moali. You made us fear our own God. You let our children die. The chief tried to speak, but no one listened. His voice was no longer power. It was noise. For a long, tense moment, all eyes turned back to Ngoma. The serpent watched silently, and then, with a slow, graceful turn, disappeared into the jungle without a sound. Not a curse. Not a roar. Just peace. As the sun rose fully over the treetops, light bathed the clearing, not in fear, but in truth. The villagers stood amid broken stone and spilled secrets, shaken but changed. And in the center, holding her daughter close, Tima whispered. It's time to build something honest. A new dawn for Kuroda. The jungle was quiet again. No rumble beneath the earth. No silver scales gleaming in the shadows. No whispers carried on the wind. Ngoma was gone. Vanished into the green depths like a dream dissolving at sunrise. And in its absence, the village of Kuroda exhaled. For the first time in living memory, no rituals were performed that week. The clearing of stones remained empty. Parents held their children not with trembling hands, but with open arms. No one watched the sky for signs. Instead, they watched each other. And what they saw was grief, but also relief. What they saw was pain and possibility. At a village gathering beneath the moon, the people of Kuroda stood in a circle, not as followers, but as decision makers. The votes were spoken one by one, in clear voices. Tear down the altar. Burn the false shrine. Start again, but with truth. And so, the false altar, the one built on bones and lies, was reduced to rubble by morning. The stones were dragged to the river, not with hate, but with intention. With the altar gone, so too went the chief. He stepped down silently, his staff left behind on the ground. No ceremony. No protest. Just a quiet departure. The elders, once feared, now stood humbly beside the people. Some wept. Some apologized. And Elder Morley. He was never seen again. But Elder Bonner, the one who spoke truth when it mattered, sat in his hut that night beneath a blanket of stars. He told one final story to Tima, smiling as his eyes began to close. We held fear like it was faith, he said. And you traded it for truth. That's a better deal. He passed in his sleep. Peaceful. Redeemed. In the weeks that followed, the villagers began to rebuild, not just their shrine, but their identity. Tima, now known across Kuroda as the Keeper of Dawn, took it upon herself to gather every story, every version, every whisper. She began writing them down on long scrolls made from bark and clay tablets. Not the stories they were told to believe, but the ones that truly happened. Children gathered outside her new hut daily, listening as she read to them from her collection, the Book of Shadows and Light. And her first entry. The serpent was never the god. We were. Then, one morning, many moons later, a child was born. Strong lungs. Bright eyes. A curious little frown like he was already asking questions. The parents stepped outside their hut just as the sun broke across the horizon. They didn't go to the altar, because there wasn't one. Instead, they walked to a hill overlooking the jungle, and as the light touched the treetops, they lifted their baby into the golden glow, not to please a god, not to avoid a curse, but to welcome life. The villagers gathered in quiet joy, no chanting, no fear, just laughter, warmth, and sunlight. It wasn't a ritual anymore. It was a reminder that truth could bloom where fear once ruled. That every dawn was a chance to begin again. And so, under a sky that watched without judgment, the village of Kuroda entered a new chapter. Not of silence, but of voice. Not of gods, but of people. The end.